building of the sacred sanctuary that our ancestors were commanded to build and rebuild and rebuild and rebuild every step on their journey from Egypt to the Promised Land, from enslavement to liberation, from darkness to light. 13 chapters of the Torah. Remember that several hundred years of our people's enslavement in Egypt is described in just a few terse lines of the text. So the details of the building of this sacred space are, to understate it, wildly disproportionate to the rest of the narrative. They're also in stark contrast to the ephemeral and visceral and supernatural events that preceded in the story of the book of Exodus. In Aviva Zornberg's words, after the terror of mystic encounter comes the shock of material, an inventory of metals and wools and woods and skins and oil and spices and stones, culminating in the simple divine demand, let them make for me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. The jar of dissonance is palpable. Moses dares the consuming fire to obey God's call, and this is the burden of his will, a list of banal objects with which to construct a home for God to live in. Because, you see, this is how we manifest the divine in our world. The divine is in the details. What the Torah seems to be teaching is that as soon as we understand as a people our core story, as soon as we understand that the trajectory of our journey as a people is from degradation to dignity, from narrowness to expansiveness, as soon as we know and can trust that God is our partner in that journey toward liberation, then it's time for us, in the language of my friend, Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock's soon-to-be released book, which he will come to this place and speak about soon, then it is time for us to become co-architects of our shared future. It's the beginning of the end of the loudest quiet phase of our capital campaign. Our trajectory as a community has been established. Our values are clear. Now we, every one of us in this community, are all being invited to become co-architects of our shared future. The IKAR Center space will address significant practical needs of our community. We are, thank God, on most Shabbatot and all holidays, bursting at the seams. We schlep around to and from multiple rental properties. We are ready for slightly more comfortable chairs, though not too much more comfortable. But the real driver of this project is not technical and it is not mathematical. How can we get our increasingly robust community into one room? The real driver of this project is how can we co-architect a physical space in the world that will become a manifestation of our deepest moral and spiritual aspirations. And so, as an introduction to our conversation today, I want to argue that what we are building together is an expression of faith and an act of healing. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs writes that in the Torah there are two great acts of creation. God created the universe, and then we, our people, created the Mishkan, this sanctuary and sacred space. He argues that the many textual and thematic connections between the creation of the world and the building of this Mishkan suggest two things. First, the tabernacle was conceived as a microcosmos, a symbolic representation of the universe as a whole. More profoundly, however, he writes, the construction of the tabernacle was itself a kind of tikun, a repair of something that had been broken long before. Today, and over the course of the next many months, we are going to explore together how we are fulfilling both of those mandates. You've heard me surely over the years share the story of the morning after the election some years ago, when we were awakened by the pitter-patter of our children's feet. They were 7, 9, and 12 years old at the time, walking into our room and asking us who won the election, and then throwing their bodies on the floor in tears when we told them the news. And you've probably heard me share one of my proudest maternal and rabbinic moments when I pulled myself together and said to our children, we are today precisely who we were yesterday, only more so. As the world grows more callous, in this house, we become more compassionate. As our society grows increasingly unfair, we double down on fairness. Even as lies become normalized, we will tell the truth. Even as the world descends into hatred, we will do everything we can to love. And our children nodded in assent with such earnestness and determination that I decided to give that same sermon to our community on Shabbat just a few days later. And since then, that lesson has shaped my understanding of our shared work. And it has informed my sense of the urgency and importance of this building project. Because like the Mishkan, we are co-creating a microcosmos. We are building together an oasis, a small sacred space right on La Cienega between 18th and Airdrome, in which we will work with every ounce of strength and intention to manifest those core values: compassion, humility, grace, and sacred presence. But that's not all, because Sachs argues that the Mishkan was also meant to be a kind of tikun, a repair for something that had been deeply broken in the world. And in the typical non-chronological reading of the Torah, the repair that he's talking about was for the spiritual descent that we'll read about next week, when our ancestors so forgot who they were that they danced around a golden calf and chanted, "This is the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt." In our context, what is the tikun? What is the sacred healing from what has been broken and is still breaking in our world? As we prepared for this conversation, my heart was heavy hearing the stories that a student at my kids' university was awakened at 6 o'clock in the morning after ICE agents from DHS, pretended to be police officers who were looking for a missing 6-year-old child in order to gain unlawful entry into the building and abduct that student. Thankfully, by the end of the day, she was released, but I thought about what is the meaning of this project in light of such cruelties in the world. And then waking up this morning to the alerts from Homefront Command, to the knowledge that my own family in Ra'anana spent the entire day in the shelter, and to think about the incredible pain that has been unleashed in our world through violence and cruelty over the last 2 months, over the last several years, and over the last many decades. I too have wondered what we do with all of this brokenness. And the answer is right here, that this project is a tikun to our own broken hearts, to our own broken Jewish community, to this city which is aching in pain, to our nation that is in the grips of a profound moral and spiritual crisis. This is a tikun, a small, humble offering to the world that healing and love are indeed possible despite it all. Seeing our project in this light endows the act of building and ultimately the physical space itself with a kind of cosmic import, an expression of faith and an act of healing and repair. And that is our frame for our conversation today. Today, we are honored to be joined by our architect, the extraordinary Barbara Bestor, an acclaimed leader in her field and a beloved member of our community. Together, we will share with you the vision of our future home, the progress that has been made in moving toward the fulfillment of that vision, and the ways that our values and vision of our community will be woven into the very DNA of our campus, and the ways that every single one of you will get involved in the days ahead. But just before we start this dialogue portion together, I want to lift up the name of Anna Marie Kramer Bestor, Barbara's beloved mother, who died just 2 weeks ago. Anna lived a vibrant and rich life that centered around her love of you, Barbara, and your daughters, Charlotte and Bea, and her friends, and her many activities, her singing groups and choirs and book groups. This is a person whose legacy is a reminder for you and for all of us to pay attention, even right now, to what is most important. And I asked Barbara if she was comfortable speaking in such close proximity to this loss, or should we reschedule today's dialogue? And Barbara responded that the IKAR project is for you, like a spiritual practice. And that was just my latest reminder that you, Barbara, are precisely the right person to guide us in co-architecting our shared future. So thank you, even more so, for being with us today. What I would first like to ask you to do is to reflect on why you said yes when we proposed to you. Why were you so eager to take this project on? What is it about sacred space, about community space, that inspires you?
Thank you so much, Sharon. Well, I think that one of the things that probably all of us like so much about Los Angeles, or maybe what brought us here in the first place, is that it's a city, it's an informal city, that we have these neighborhoods, well, I guess more recently we have some big monumental buildings, but in general, the context has always been a kind of humanist, although perhaps more car-oriented than some of us would like, context. And the idea of making, a space for profound spiritual engagement, but that's also a space for social justice and building community and building, kind of interacting with the neighborhood has really always been one of my goals as an architect. Like the idea of building community in general is kind of one of the driving forces. And then as a designer, I guess the idea of how do you do that in a way that isn't about sort of monumental symbolic language. And I feel like from the beginning with IKAR, there's always been that idea that, we're not your parents' synagogue. Like there was definitely a moment in the history of design in America that were kind of really big symbolic gestures, almost sculptural, but that maybe the history of nomadic inhabitants for IKAR. I think I first came here when we were in Olympic at the other community center there, but that even that nomadism speaks to that sort of flexibility and ability to grow and extend. And so what would be a space that could hold that without containing it too tightly or, giving it a specific legibility in the city that says something formally that isn't always going to be everybody's idea of what it should say. So I think, to me, I'm always interested in this. I call it informal formalism, which is, if anyone who saw the model there, the idea may be that the building itself doesn't have to exaggerate its importance on the street, doesn't have to say, I am holy on the street, but that the experience of it once you're inside, or once the things that happen there, or the spaces between buildings, or the garden, or the relationship to the indoor-outdoor, that becomes the space for that more spiritual connection and community building. That it is designed, but it isn't about its face. The facade isn't the main thing.
I love that. And we're going to come back to this theme in a few moments. And I want to just say that we had an incredible team working to choose the architects, and we met some incredible artists. And part of the reason that we were so drawn to you, Barbara, is because you build spaces that people want to be in, that people connect to each other in. And we're going to come back to that theme in just a few moments. And I feel it in all the spaces that you've designed that I've been in. And there are many we can share with you, places that people can go visit in the city. But you, in many ways, created a whole new culture in bringing people together. And that's really joyful, because that, for us, that's exactly what we want our space to do. I want to get very tachlis for a moment and catch you all up, and then we're going to get into a couple of the core values of IKAR and the way that Barbara is imagining them manifesting in physical form. But I want to make sure everyone's on the same page. So the property that we're talking about is 1737 La Cienega, with a series of adjacent plots stretching north on that street from our IKAR offices to the La Cienega Inn, which is, as my husband calls it, a no-tell motel just to our north. On that property, that entire stretch, we will be building a home for IKAR, a center for spiritual and intellectual and multi-faith civic engagement, And many of you know that for years we've been exploring under the leadership of our fearless leader and CEO, Melissa Balaban, along with Michelle Rosenthal and Ethan Goldstein and Brooke Wertschefter and many others, ways to build permanent supportive housing and or affordable housing on our site, which was born out of our great concern for the housing crisis in this city and our belief that we as a faith community can and must do better for our neighbors who are most vulnerable to homelessness. And after years of wrestling with the question of how to fit IKAR's expansive program and the housing all on one limited plot of land, we're really thrilled to announce today that as of, I think, 36 hours ago, we are in escrow on an additional property just to the south of our IKAR offices, which is another no-tell motel, which will be transformed, God willing, into a multi-level parking facility for IKAR, along with many units of housing in that spot, which really allows us to do everything that we want to do. You can applaud. It's a big deal, and it's a great reminder that sometimes you have to look at a problem from multiple different angles in order to figure out how to solve it. And I'm incredibly grateful to Melissa and the team for figuring this out, to Mark Borman and Ethan Goldstein for really pushing this across the finish line. There's some extraordinary folks here. By sheer force of will, we've made this happen. And this really gives Barbara and her team the full canvas of our original property to dream up how we're going to inhabit the space in the most artful way. So I want to now ask you if you can take us into several of the spaces in the building that will help us manifest our core values as a community. Now, all of you have source sheets in front of you, and we're not going to do everything here, but we are going to use text as an entry point into the core values, and then have Barbara reflect on the design elements of those values. And that's because text and tradition, as you know, are at the very heart of IKAR, and also because in our architectural and design meetings, we have been putting text on the table from the beginning as we begin to share ideas of what this space could and must be. So I want to bring you to a text that comes from Brachot 8a in the Talmud, in which Rav Chisda says this astonishing statement, Leolam yikanes adam shnei ptachim bebeit hakneset, that whenever you enter a synagogue, you should enter through two different doors. And they go on to ask, literally, do we have to walk through two separate sets of doors when we enter into a sanctuary? By the way, according to the latest safety guidelines, that's not the worst idea to walk through two separate sets of doors. But what was Rav Chisda talking about? Why must we walk through two separate sets of doors? And they have, in the Gemara, an interesting interpretation of why that must be. But I've always been drawn to Sefer Kol Mevaser, which comes much later, which is a Hasidic idea that says the reason that the rabbis wanted us to walk through two separate doors is because when we enter sacred space, we are entering through two mindsets that are in tension with each other. The first is, Bishvili nivra ha'olam, for my sake the world was created. And the second is Anochi afar ve'efer. The first is I have agency, I have responsibility in the world, and I deserve to be in this place and to use my body and my voice for good in the world. And the second is, it's not all about me. Let me see if there's something bigger than me that I can join forces with as we work for healing and redemption in this world. So I want to ask you, Barbara, if you can think and take us through how we will enter sacred ground and communal space. What is the feeling that we want people to have, and how will we manifest feelings of both agency and also humility in the space that you are building?
I think this idea, of thresholds is just such it's a huge architectural idea. And I do love the kind of combination of the holy and the ashes, the grandeur and the humility, that there's different kinds of ways of transitioning. But that it's like the idea of experiencing the threshold, say, from the world through layers into spiritual practice or other, community space, allows us to, I guess, think about it, that how does the person's experience, like how do we sort of make each of those moments a special moment? And we have a lot of different kinds of entries. We have this part of the building that's the kind of cafe bookstore that's really a public facing kind of entry threshold that right now is also combined with our primary threshold from La Cienega. And that in a way, even on like a Wednesday, is a kind of experience of the building that's kind of speaking to the outside and has a layer of, outdoor space that's public. But then beyond that is another doorway that leads into this pretty huge courtyard, which if you look at the model outside, like a 40-foot wide by several, like 150 feet long, that's really our landscape. So you're really entering into like a garden from the street, from a very busy street through a couple of doorways into a garden. And then from there, there's a kind of somewhat transparent relationship to the sanctuary on the one side and also some other community spaces on the other side. So each of those moments maybe gives the person a chance to kind of reorient, and like sort of your idea of where you are starts to reorient a little bit in terms of these experiences. We also are talking about separating and having another kind of entrance for the early childhood education. It kind of comes, it's like more related to the realities of that, where you drop off your child in the alleyway and there's an entryway there. It also acts as a sort of a back door to the sanctuary, but having multiple kinds of entry points is also, I think, kind of a beautiful way of thinking that the building has some porosity, and within the community of several buildings that we're making, which are really 3 buildings, that there's always these connections and thresholds, whether they're windows or doorways, that allow you to kind of reorient, where you are at that moment.
I love the entry to your architectural offices, that gorgeous yellow door. There's an element of surprise, even to the way that the door itself opens. And I feel there's something so whimsical and exciting and fresh about the way that you think about entryways. And I love the layer of, like, I'm here for a reason, says our tradition. Bishvili nivra ha'olam. I deserve to be here. There's something for me to bring into this space and to receive from this space. As a kind of awakening of the soul to some extent, and thinking about walking in that way, and then the surprise of the entry itself, and then the surprise of what one sees when you come in off of this loud, busy street, and then into this sacred garden, a garden of gratitude and a place of real connection. I really love that. I'm going to give you another architectural image, which comes from the design in the Mishkan, in the temple, in the tabernacle, which is the cover of the ark, which has these 2 angels on it. And you can see this in text number 3 on your sheet. We've talked a lot about the kruvim zahav, that there are 2 angels, these that are planted on top of the ark. And what's so interesting is that to me is that their feet are on the base, and then their wings are up to the spread out above them, and they shield the cover with their wings. And there's so many elements of this that I love, especially from a tradition that really resists that kind of physical imagery of holy things, which is there's not one, but there are 2. And it seems to be indicating that sacredness comes from connecting with another. And we know that God's voice emanates from in between the wings of the 2 kruvim. And so I'm really curious to ask you about how you're envisioning the architecture, indoor and outdoor, of this building as an invitation into sacred encounter, in which people will actually be able to meet one another. This feels like a particularly urgent need in our time of so much loneliness and social alienation and isolation. How can we find one another and perhaps find God in the space that you are designing? How is the space itself designed to help us find each other?
And I guess as an architect, I think of that as sort of relational space, where, like, what is the relationship between to create that encounter? Like, if sort of God is in the space of encounter, there's so many opportunities, especially with the different kinds of programs that we have, within the larger complex of, how does the school actually relate to, or the limudim relate to the sanctuary itself? They're actually adjacent and often overlap in some ways. Or the the garden provides this real mixing ground from offices, sanctuary, cafe, that just provide all these different kinds of spaces. But in the past, I used to design a lot of large, I call it interior urbanism, kind of large workspaces for like 600 people or something like that. And one of the goals in that is that there's always going to be different kinds of places for people to go to that are distinct from each other. So the introverts might prefer the little corner over here, or the kind of large groups, would kind of use this sort of space for their engagement. And I think, we even have a roof deck that we're going to be able to have that has another kind of a space that can be public, but also for lunch or for other things. But that from that you do have a visual of the wall, of like the transparent wall of the sanctuary that's into the garden. So there's sometimes it's a visual encounter, sometimes it's a conversation, but that there's these different ways that even the way that the furniture works, or that the doors work, or how you could open up, the side of the sanctuary to the garden, that those are all these places that this group and this group kind of overlap and cross paths and have that moment of encounter for.
I'm so looking forward to that, because it feels right now we're just spread out, as I said, on multiple campuses, and just imagine having all of us in one place so parents can drop their kids off at ECC, and then they go into the cafe, and there's a poet that's reading and doing a reading, and there's a multi-faith gathering, and then there's yoga, and there's all these different elements of the community that can all actually happen in one place now. One of the other things that I love about the Kruvim is that it feels to me that there's a message here about the pragmatic and the aspirational, that really it's both awe-inspiring and also intimate, which is something that we've talked a lot about, trying to envision a space that's large enough for us to fit our large and ever-growing community for these spiritual sacred moments, including the High Holy Days, but that also is intimate enough for the small Shabbatot when there's no limudim, like today, and sometimes over the summer when we have just a couple hundred people here, and we really want to feel close to each other. We want to see each other and be seen by one another. And I love that you are always thinking both about how to inspire awe, and at the same time how to help us feel held, which feels like a message also for our time that I'm very struck by. I'm going to bring us to one more, which is a Torah that I've been sharing from the beginning at IKAR, because the very first spaces in which we prayed, where it was a giant auditorium that had no windows in it, and I was saying to the community over and over again, aspirationally, that in Masachet Brachot, in the Talmud, it says, Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, that Rabbi Yochanan said, that you can only pray in a house that has windows, that we're actually not allowed to pray in a space without windows. And the reason why is because we're part of the world, and we have to be receptive to what's going on in the world. We can't just sort of shake off what's happening outside. This war that is unfolding right now is very much a part of my prayers today, and I don't want to block it out. I want to be a part of the world, and then I want my prayers to elevate me from the place that I was in when I entered the space. But it's not just about receiving what's coming from the world, but also about us emanating a kind of light out from inside the community. And I want to just invite you briefly, if you would, to share with us how you envision the space interacting with the city around us. How do you see the structure and the campus as permeable, even as it's also safe? So both inspired by and also inspiring the rest of the city around us.
I think, the idea of one of the wonderful things about the new possibilities, since we have this other space, because we were pretty densely packed, we have a little more breathing room, so the sanctuary actually gets to have windows on 3 sides, including the street, as well as skylights. And I think the way that it's visible from the street is going to be sort of a view up towards the ceiling. The idea for the sanctuary is to kind of do the whole thing out of super sustainable wooden construction. I was actually thinking about the Jacobs and the trees passage that's in the source material there, but that we're building something that is does provide, in that sense, like a kind of a visual beacon of a somewhat simple but beautiful sort of natural material. It's also something that is, doesn't have a carbon footprint that basically it's the best material for sustainable building possible. And our new scenario allows us to build most of our structures out of wood. But I think that the transparency, the idea that the building is kind of following that ancient argument against insularity, and that's happening both on a programmatic level with the cafe, with that garden, which has potential for public space, but also that in a way, as we kind of now have the space down the street, and the way that I've been thinking about the building is really sort of like three buildings. In a way, we're kind of we're perhaps healing. If you think about the motels as maybe not the healthiest, healing that streetscape too, to make a kind of a neighborhood. So there's sort of, we're going down the street. In the future, we might even get the spaces in between the other ones, to sort of have this idea of a expandable community, but it feels a little bit like a village, and one that's sort of accessible to people of IKAR and people outside of IKAR, which I know it's been such a big desire for you and Melissa from the beginning to have that cafe really be functioning in a lot of ways for a lot of different people, and that we might even make that part of the building like a little more elaborate, like that might have the tile sort of exterior, that's next to the garden wall, and then the sanctuary building might be kind of more simple, but with a beautiful huge window. So that there's sort of at the street level, at the car level, a way that we're sort of open to everybody back and forth without, being unsafe, but just sort of making it feel very different than, say, like the concrete walls that we've seen around a lot getting built the last 20 years. It's really kind of taking that down a notch and making more of a open village.
This is something I've always loved about your vision, that you're inviting us to think about the contribution that we're making to the city, that people who are kind of racing to work on La Cienega also need the gift of seeing green and seeing art and seeing beauty. And there's so much in the parasha, both last week, this week, in the coming couple of weeks, about physical beauty. And you made it onto the source sheet this week. Barbara Bestor says that everybody should experience strange beauty every day. And really in a tradition that's so that struggles so much with the physicality of things, I think, and not wanting to put too much of a focus on the physical, is very wary of attachment to beauty and really prioritizes soul over the like sort of physical external of things. Yet even Rambam says that when you are afflicted with melancholy, look at something beautiful, listen to something beautiful. It changes our inner life when we do. And so I'm so grateful to you for helping us think about how we can bring that beauty into our lives and really into the world. What I want to do, because our time is unfortunately short, is two things. One, Barbara mentioned the audacious team, these acacia wood, pieces of acacia wood, and I just want to lift up this one dimension which appears on the source sheet, and you can take a closer look at it later. But in the making of the Mishkan in the desert, there are many elements that we are called to create from acacia wood. And this is such a strange detail, because how do you find acacia wood in the desert? And so the rabbis tell the story that Jacob, and this is in Midrash Tanchuma, that Jacob embedded a message of hope for his descendants as they went into Egypt. When Jacob came down into Egypt, he brought acacia wood saplings, which were then planted in Egypt. And he said to his children, "You will become enslaved in this place. Dark days are ahead. But one day you will emerge from this place, and you will need these saplings, which will be by that point, hundreds of years later, full-grown acacia trees, to bring with you on your journey to liberation." And I love the idea that we're planting right now in this place with your guidance, that we are planting the seeds for what our children and grandchildren will one day need in the world, spaces to convene in holy purpose. So I want to close us by saying a real thank you to everybody in our community who's with us here now and who's here with us virtually. who's already given of your time and your money and your wisdom as we have engaged in this process, to people who've hosted events and who have negotiated contracts with sleazy property owners and who have sat in endless hours of strategy sessions. I am really grateful and thrilled to share that to date, we have now raised more than $71 million. We are very close. We still have a ways to go. And as of today, you are all officially being invited to join us in this beautiful and hopeful journey. Today begins the community phase of the campaign, led graciously by Rabbi Panitz and by Nikki, by Betsy, and by Julia, whom you saw earlier. Hi. And thank you. They said, we're not exactly sure what we've taken on, but we're here for it. And that's exactly the kind of leadership we need. So thank you. Our goal in the community is 100% participation, with every single person in the community contributing meaningfully. Kol ish ve'isha asher yidvenu libo, every single person giving according to both your capacity and the inclination of your heart. And so today there really are two main asks. We are asking you after Shabbat to go to our website if you're ready to make a contribution to this beautiful project. If you know what you're going to be able to give, we thank you. And you can just go ahead and give. Or you can sign up to attend or to host a house party, a salon in which we're going to be gathering together first in the coming month and then in the coming many months, so that you can hear more from some of our leadership about what this campaign will look like and join forces with other community members who are also working to discover what they're going to be able to give. And I want to close by sharing a conversation that I had with Levi a couple of months ago. Hi, and thank you for the inspiration. Levi's comment was, Ima, why do we need a community phase? Isn't that just a massive amount of energy that we have to expend in order to get to our goal? And I asked Levi to think about his relationship to his room in our house. So here, forgive me for getting personal for just a moment, but I want to share with you that the day that our middle daughter, Sammy, left for her gap year program, we returned from the airport and Levi sat us down in the kitchen and told us that we needed to come to terms with the reality that the girls had grown up and moved out, and they would only come back now as visitors in our home. And that's why he deserved to move into and redesign their room as his own, which he subsequently did. He chose all of the furniture and the mattress and the sheets and the plants and the pots that they would go in and the art that would go on the walls. And I want you to know that my son Levi takes really, really good care of his room. And I believe that part of the reason why is because he helped build it himself. Because our relationship to a community and to a space changes when we help build it. And that is exactly what we are inviting all of you into. So I'm going back to where I started. We are inviting you to co-architect with us this microcosmos, this oasis of love and care and justice and generosity in a truly upside-down world. And to remember that investing in a creative act in dark and stormy times is an act of resistance, and it is an act of defiance. This building is an opportunity for us to root in and to plant our core values. And the more counter-normative our collective values are today, the more this work matters. So I hope that you will join us in investing in a vision that is joyful and artful and hopeful, an expression of faith that the forces we face will not prevail today, but we and our values will prevail. To co-architect with us the tikun, the healing that our community and the world needs. As Adam Pritzker, one of our beloved community members, said about a year ago today, not every generation is afforded the opportunity to build something new in the world, something lasting. And this is our generation's chance. This is our community's chance. So thank you all so much for joining us on this sacred journey. Thank you, Barbara. We're so grateful for you. Thank you, everybody. And Shabbat Shalom. We're going to close our service now with Ein Keloheinu. So please rise and join us in song.